For over a decade, Claudia Hoerig had been living a peaceful life in her native country of Brazil. She'd been operating her own accounting business and keeping a low profile with her third husband, making sure not to attract any unwanted attention. But what neighbors and friends didn't realize was that there was a reason behind her extremely quiet existence. Claudia had been harboring a dark secret, a truth that would stun even the most closest to her. She'd spent the last 10 years as a fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, wanted for the murder of her second husband, Carl Hoerig. Join me now as we explore the case of Claudia Hoerig, a woman who fled a difficult upbringing in Brazil, seeking a better life in the United States, only to find herself fleeing back again. You'll hear the story of a once promising marriage that descended into chaos, ultimately ending in tragedy, and a family's quest for justice. You might say flying was in Carl Hoerig's blood. As an Air Force reservist and a pilot with Southwest Airlines, the skies became Carl's second home. But it wasn't just the commercial flights that defined him. It was the daring missions he'd undertaken as a reservist, rising through the ranks to major and facing the dangers of combat firsthand in Iraq and Afghanistan, with over 200 missions under his belt. Yet amidst all the adrenaline-fueled adventures, there was a softer side to Carl. He'd held a unique position in the Air Force, one of only 10 sprayers tasked with bringing aid and hope to regions ravaged by natural disasters, such as famine and flooding. But amid his bravery and heroism, Carl faced a different kind of challenge in his sleepy hometown of Newton Falls, Ohio. In a town where everyone knows everyone's business, and where the population barely tips 5,000, Newton Falls wasn't exactly teeming with dating opportunities. In fact, it's the kind of place where you either settle down with a family or retire quietly into the sunset. And perhaps that's why Carl Hoerig first decided to dip his toes into the world of online dating. He'd already loved and lost twice in his life, meeting his first love Rhonda at a military ball, who he later married and had 2 children with. Then there was South American Carla del Castillo, a whirlwind romance sparked after his divorce during a routine mission in Peru. But as fate would have it, Carl would find himself alone again 2 years later. After his second heartbreak with Carla, it appeared Carl had developed a taste for exotic women, because after creating a profile on Match.com in 2005, it had been a 40-year-old Brazilian woman who caught his eye, Claudia Sobral. Claudia's journey was a tale of resilience and reinvention. Growing up in Rio, Claudia's life hadn't been easy. But in her 20s, she immigrated to the US hoping for a better life, which it seems she found. In the 9 years since Claudia moved to New York City, she married a successful doctor, found herself a high-paying job as an accountant, and eventually became a naturalized U.S. citizen. But like Carl Hoerig, Claudia too would find herself divorced. Still, despite her ups and downs, Claudia had carved out a successful life for herself. She owned her own condo, diligently saved for her retirement, and eventually felt ready to look for love again. That's when she decided to set up a profile on Match.com, just as Carl Hoerig had. When Carl first saw Claudia's profile on Match.com, he was so captivated by it that he returned to it several times. But something was holding him back from messaging her. Her listed location. A drive from Newton Falls to New York City wasn't exactly a hop, skip, and a jump. But by plane, well, that's a whole different story. As a pilot for Southwest Airlines, Carl's mind began to whirl. Maybe the distance wasn't a huge hurdle after all. Claudia describes her reaction to receiving Carl's first message.
I thought it was weird that a man from Ohio would contact a woman in New York, being that I put the range of a person that I wanted to meet right in New York City, like 10 miles. And there comes a man that was like 500 miles away from me. I thought it was strange.
At first, Claudia says she was apprehensive about pursuing anything with Carl. She wasn't interested in a long-distance relationship. She made that clear on her profile. And even if she was, how would it even work? That's when Carl gave his sales pitch.
He said, look, I can fly anywhere I want because I have this flying privileges. You can just tell me what time you want to meet, the day and time you want me to be in New York, and I'll be there. But I was working, so I think I told him that he could come on a Friday.
True to his word, Carl showed up on a Friday and caught Claudia totally off guard. She couldn't believe he hadn't just been pulling her leg when he said he'd fly to meet her. That's what really impressed her the most. And they hit it off too. That weekend Carl visited, Claudia showed him around the parts of New York City she'd grown to love over the years, taking him out for dinner and to all of her favorite spots. In fact, they got along so well that on the very Friday Carl landed in New York, he proposed to her. And that was only after chatting online for about a week and just meeting her for the first time. Claudia describes her reaction after Carl's proposal.
I thought it was great. I mean, I was very happy to hear that. But I said, oh, yeah, my intentions are to marry you because, I like you, but we need to know each other better and we need to move to New York.
After turning down Carl's proposal, Claudia agreed to fly out to Ohio for their second meeting. But this time, she was also meeting Carl's Air Force colleagues at a party, a pajama party, where Carl had laid out clear instructions for what she would wear.
Sexy white silk pajama that was see-through, and a high heel that has a pom-pom. You know how to...
Okay, so a high-heeled shoe with a pom-pom on it?
Yeah, everything was white or off-white, and it was sleek, but it was very sexy. But he gave me directions, and he told me to buy him pajamas too, the navy with some pattern, and I did exactly what he told me.
Okay.
According to Claudia, she felt embarrassed by the whole situation, but said she went along with it to make Carl happy. The next time she met Carl, he flew to New York, but this time he had his 16-year-old son Brent with him. Throughout the visit, Claudia insisted that she foot the bill for everything. But it was Claudia's next visit to Newton Falls she described was the most astonishing.
He said, we're going to spend the weekend somewhere, but he didn't tell me where. He said, just bring a little overnight bag with, some clothes to sleep. We're going to spend 2 days away. He didn't explain to me where we're going.
Claudia and Carl drove to his brother Paul Hoerig's house. From there, Paul drove the couple to a ferry, where they made their way to Put-in Bay, an Ohio village on South Bass Island in Lake Erie. And to Claudia's surprise, all of Carl's friends were there.
Everybody came to me to say, congratulations, congratulations. And I thought I was missing something on the English language because I don't know what they are congratulating me for. And I was just, thank you, trying to give it enough time for me to pick up and understand what they were congratulating me for. And they were congratulating me for my engagement. That was my engagement party that I had no idea.
After the engagement party, Claudia went back to New York, and despite her initial surprise over an engagement she claimed to know nothing about, Claudia didn't make a stink about it and went about making wedding plans for August. But those plans would soon change.
He felt that me being in New York and all those pictures that I had on Match.com, and I hadn't yet taken them down. He was afraid that somebody else was going to propose to me and he was going to lose me. So he said, we better close those 500-mile gap because you may change your mind about marrying me. So he was anxious to get married, very anxious.
So Claudia agreed to push the wedding date up, and on June 30th, 2005, she married Carl in Las Vegas. This was after their fourth meeting in person. Again, according to Claudia, she covered all the wedding expenses, including the food, plane tickets, wedding attire, and rings. But for some reason during the wedding ceremony, both Claudia and Carl began to get cold feet about the whole thing.
While we were there, I didn't have a good feeling about the whole thing, so we talked and we decided not to get married. We both decided not to get married.
After deciding to call the wedding off, Claudia claims Carl changed his mind again.
We went to the airport and we tried to get another flight. It was going to cost the same amount of the ticket, $500 a piece, to reschedule it. So we said, you know what, we're here. Let's have a good time. Let's enjoy ourselves. So we stayed. And then the next day he said, you know what, let's do it. Let's get married. And I kind of went along with, if he said, let's not get married, I would agree with him. He said, let's get married, I would agree with him. It's just whatever he said, I would agree with him. So when he changed his mind, he said, no, I want to do it. I said, okay, let's do it. So I was going along with everything he wanted.
Some say financial crime is victimless, but that definitely isn't the case, especially when it ends in murder. You need to check out Money Crimes, a new show hosted by best-selling author and entrepreneur Nicole Lapin. Money Crimes is about the world's biggest financial scandals and how they can spiral out of control in ways you'd never expect. From cunning Ponzi schemes to cutthroat politics and even murderous con artists. You'll learn that the financial world is more dangerous than you ever imagined, and most importantly, how to protect yourself from it. Money Crimes is a Crime House original powered by Pave Studios. New episodes release every Thursday. Just search for Money Crimes. That's MoneyCrimes. After the wedding, Claudia moved into Carl's home in Ohio and didn't tell her boss or coworkers in New York she was quitting and never coming back. But it seemed the honeymoon phase wouldn't last long for the newlywed couple.
Right after I get married, I said, you know, I made a big mistake. I wanted to know this thing. And he felt the same way. He agreed with me, and as soon as we landed in Ohio, that same day I said, I'm going to New York. I'm packing my stuff. So I left that day.
So Claudia did just that. She packed her bags and went back to New York with no plans to return to Ohio. Luckily, because she hadn't given any official notice that she'd quit her job, Claudia was able to give her boss an excuse for why she'd missed 2 days of work without calling in or giving any explanation. Claudia said she'd been too embarrassed to explain the real reason, that she'd impulsively gone to Vegas and married someone she hardly knew. Claudia then went back to living her everyday life in New York. But after just 2 weeks of being apart, Carl randomly called Claudia at 9 a.m. one morning with an ultimatum.
He said, did you tell your boss yet that you got married? I said, no, I haven't. He said, I'm calling your boss now. I'm telling him that you married this man in Ohio. I said, no, I want myself to tell her that I knew what I did. I wanted her to hear from you. And he said, I'll give you until 2 o'clock for you to tell your boss If you don't, I'm going to call her and tell her.
Feeling backed into a corner, Claudia gathered the courage to tell her boss about her unexplained absence, and her boss fired her on the spot. Now unemployed and doubtful she'd find employment in New York's competitive job market, Claudia moved back to Ohio to live with Carl.
Well, because he gave me this ultimatum and I lost my job, I had no place to go, but if I come here, at least I would have a roof over my head, and I thought I was going to have food. I thought I'm not going to have a lot of expenses, so I'm going to move there. And also he said something very nice that it compelled me to come. He said, you belong here with me, your husband, in Ohio. You belong by my side. Let's forget about everything that happened. Let's start fresh. We belong together. I thought those words were very sincere words. I believe those words.
Okay.
After moving back to Newton Falls, Claudia said she was surprised to find Carl's son living there, as he had told her he lived with his mother. Then, in July 2005, just a month after tying the knot, Claudia found out she was pregnant, which came as a huge shock to her. She assumed she passed the point of being able to get pregnant, and apparently, Carl hadn't taken the news too well.
He said that I set him up and he didn't want anything to happen to my body which belonged to him. He didn't want me to have stretch marks like it happened to his first wife. And he hates stretch marks, and he said they could cause sexual difficulty with his first wife, Rhonda, because she had stretch marks. And he didn't want to take a chance of me getting stretch marks. He didn't want me to get pregnant.
According to Claudia, Carl suggested an abortion.
Now I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have an abortion. I didn't plan this, I didn't want to. Didn't think I could get pregnant. I didn't think about motherhood. I didn't crave it because I never felt it. But once I had that thing inside of me, I wanted it. I didn't want to have the abortion, no.
Claudia claimed that refusing to have an abortion caused a lot of tension in their marriage, and that Carl was determined not to have the baby.
When he realized that I'm really not going to have the abortion, he started torturing me psychologically, physically, finding ways to stress me out so I would have a natural abortion, what do you call it, a miscarriage, sleep deprivation. He would make me run miles, and then he would leave me out in the middle of the woods in Newton Falls, dark, like 6 p.m., and then disappear. I would freak out and start running real fast because I was scared that he left me behind. So I started running. I was pregnant, and then I guess that it wasn't good. It was early pregnancy. He would do that and he wanted me to get in real good shape. He made me to work out with weights, and he was like a personal trainer while I was pregnant. I guess all of this made me have the miscarriage.
After having a miscarriage, Carl announced he was taking off to Texas for a few months to train, leaving Brent in Claudia's care.
I had expectation that he would pay for my food and Brent's food because I wasn't working. I had savings, but I had no intentions of spending that money. And he left us with no money to eat, not for me or Brent, nothing. So I had to feed ourselves, me and Brent. So I used the money, the savings that I had. I started using that savings for food, for clothes, for me, for Brent. Brent ate quite a bit. He was a big boy. He liked his snacks and a lot of pop. He ate quite a bit.
When Carl returned from Texas, Claudia says their marriage continued to go downhill. She claimed to have felt suffocated by her husband's controlling behavior, including his strict dress requirements for when they went out in public.
Yes, Carl also picked my clothes and laid down on the bed, and he picked the shoes. But to be open-toe shoes, I was not allowed to wear boots, or with him, I was not allowed, even if it was going out.
Claudia claimed Carl also had strict dress requirements for her inside the house, forcing her to dress provocatively.
Basically, I could only wear a short skirt with heels, but I couldn't wear other shoes as long as it was high heel, open toes, and just very small top during the day. But if it was other times, it was later at night, I had to walk around just in heels, no clothes, naked.
According to Claudia, Carl was also a sexual deviant who was obsessed with BDSM and made her participate in the bedroom.
He was not able to perform without Viagra or without bondage or without something weird or me pretending to be dead. He would not get an erection with normal sex.
Claudia stated that in December 2005, after getting an accounting job in Ohio, Carl made her financially responsible for nearly all of their expenses.
I paid on every expense in the house, food, everything. If he needed paint for the house, he was always remodeling. He had an obsession with remodeling, with painting walls all the time, taking walls down. He was always rebuilding the house. So I paid for everything except for the mortgage and the electric. Everything else was on me. Everything was on me.
Carl had a busy work schedule, but when he was home, he forced her to stay up with him until 3 a.m. watching TV, even though she had to get up at 5 a.m. for work.
I was obligated to watch TV with him. He would lay down on the couch, and I had to sit by his foot and just not move like a statue. And if I called or anything and changed position, he would give me a dirty look and really have an evil look to his face. But I was allowed to get up to get him drinks or food. He ate a lot. He was always telling me, get up, go make something for me to eat, make this, make that. I want a specific drink. He would do specific things, and he was drinking a lot.
In February 2006, Claudia became pregnant for a second time.
He said, we already discussed that. You keep setting me up. You're going to have an abortion. We're not discussing pregnancy in this house. We're not discussing it.
Claudia claimed Carl deliberately deprived her of sleep, a ploy she believed was to cause her a miscarriage again. And she did. Claudia stated that after suffering 2 miscarriages, she started feeling depressed and suicidal.
First of all, I started gaining weight. The depression caught up with me from the first miscarriage, and then the second miscarriage. Me working a lot, not getting enough sleep, a lot of demands. I have to keep the house perfect. So it was a lot of demand on my physical, so many rules that I have to follow. I cannot do this, I cannot do that. I have to wear this clothes, I have to wear that clothes, I have to eat this, I cannot eat that. So I can't speak, I cannot think, I cannot have an opinion. I couldn't do anything. I had to be invisible. I had to be like a robot, a geisha, a doll. I was not human. He didn't treat me like a human being. He didn't treat me like I was a person.
In mid-2006, Brent moved back to North Carolina to live with his mother. And by late 2006, Claudia says she'd reached a breaking point, leading her to attempt suicide with Carl's pistol. But she said something held her back.
I was afraid of not dying, just, what do you call it, getting wounded and not dying. So I didn't have to carry it.
Now remember, what you've just heard is all from Claudia's perspective. Carl's friends and family had a whole different perspective on the situation. In their eyes, Claudia had started acting increasingly erratic in the marriage, and Carl confided in his loved ones that he wanted to actually leave Claudia. To friends and family, Claudia seemed extremely possessive of Carl and wanted him all to herself. And here's just one example. In the summer of 2006, Claudia attended a bachelorette party for Amy, one of Carl's Air Force colleagues. One of the women attending was Krista Bridges, who knew Carl from the Air Force Reserves. Krista had only met Claudia twice before, but during dinner at the party, Claudia unexpectedly leaned toward Krista and whispered something chilling in her ear.
So, Michelle and Amy and the girls were all sitting there. We were talking about Carl in the cockpit. It was a funny story during deployment. And Claudia was sitting to my right. And all of a sudden during the story, she leaned over to me and said, if he ever leaves me, I would kill him.
It was a comment she found strange and morbid, but she didn't dwell on it. Then, on February 7th, 2007, Claudia invited Carl's entire family to their home for an emergency meeting to discuss the couple's declining marriage. Carl was completely unaware of the family intervention taking place in his own home until he went downstairs for his morning coffee. During the meeting, Claudia accused Carl of being emotionally abusive, while Carl, on the other hand, accused Claudia of not helping out around the house. When Carl suggested getting a divorce, Claudia fainted. Then she locked herself in the bathroom. Later that day, she swallowed close to 30 sleeping pills and told Carl she was going to kill herself.
I told Carl, look, Carl, I did this. I just want you to know that I took those pills. I probably will die, but I don't want to die in this house because I don't want you to be responsible for my death. So I'm just going to get in my car and drive away, and I'll die somewhere else. It's not going to be your fault. And in the meeting, before I told him that, I went and hid his car keys so he could not just follow me in my car. And I went in my car and took the car, started driving, and I lost consciousness. Real quick, I think less than 10 minutes, 10 minutes maximum I lost consciousness. So I don't know what happened, where I drove to. I don't remember the driving because I lost consciousness.
Claudia ended up driving into a ditch and was brought to the ER, where she was revived.
Well, they took me to the hospital, they revived me, and they released me, and we were waiting in some room for paperwork, and the nurse, she asked him, Mr. Carl, are you ready for Miss Hoerig to come back home? And he hesitated, and she wanted to know why he hesitated. It's because I had just told him about trying to commit suicide with his gun. So then he told the nurse about this first suicide, and the nurse said, well, now it's 2 suicides. I'm going to tell that to the psychiatrist, and put me in a mental hospital for 3 days.
Carl had reached his breaking point and was already making plans to leave. He rented a place nearby so Claudia could keep the house, not wanting to displace her when she couldn't support herself. He told Claudia he would be gone permanently by March 12th. On March 10th, Carl had a layover in North Carolina during an assignment for Southwest Airlines. He spent the next couple of days with his ex-wife Rhonda and their 2 adult children. He told Rhonda he was planning on divorcing Claudia, and before he left, Rhonda told him to call her once he returned home. He never did. Concerned about his best friend's absence, Gary Dodge tried calling Carl and left a message, telling him if he didn't call back or show up for work within an hour, he'd be calling the police. When he didn't return the call, Gary dialed 911 and asked them to conduct a welfare check on his friend. But after police arrived at Carl's home and knocked on the door, there was no response. When authorities peered inside Carl's vehicle parked in the driveway, they saw a suitcase and a cell phone. It looked like Carl may have been in the middle of leaving. Police managed to contact Carl's father, Ed, who rushed over to let the police in after being told why they were there. As police and Carl's father entered Carl's home, Gary was still on the phone to hear Ed's horrified scream in the background. At the base of the staircase was a lumpy figure, buried beneath a comforter and construction tarp. Once police removed the tarp, they found Carl's body. He'd been shot twice in the back and once in the head, execution style. 2 other shots had been fired, hitting the floor next to his body. Based on decomposition, police could tell Carl had been deceased for a few days by that point. Early on in their investigation, police were able to rule out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. There were no signs of a forced entry, and it appeared no valuables had been taken. In the bedroom upstairs, police found a partially consumed bottle of alcohol in the bed. In the next room, they found the smoking gun, literally, as they opened the closet. A 2x4 had been screwed into the wall with a hole drilled in the middle of the board, where a .357 Magnum revolver, cocked and loaded, faced outward into the bedroom with a string attaching the trigger to the door. And the one person who could give them the answers was now the one person who was nowhere to be found: Carl Hoerig's wife, Claudia. The last person who saw Claudia was the next-door neighbor, who witnessed her hastily getting into her BMW 3 days before, speeding down the street. After a bolo was sent out to the public for Claudia's BMW, it was eventually found at the Pittsburgh International Airport. It was looking more and more like Claudia had skipped town, maybe even the country, which meant any chances of catching her were now gone. As it turned out, Claudia hadn't just left Ohio, she left the United States. After catching a flight to New York, she caught another flight to Brazil. During the investigation, police learned that on March 9th, Claudia closed her bank account and wired nearly $10,000 to her father in Brazil. The next day, she purchased the gun that would be used to execute her husband. That same day, she installed a laser sight grip on the gun and went to a firing range to practice shooting. The evidence compiled against Claudia was overwhelming. Exactly 1 month after Carl's body was found, police issued a warrant for Claudia Hoerig's arrest. However, there was just one major obstacle in their way. Despite their best efforts to have Claudia extradited to the US to be tried for Carl's murder, the Brazilian constitution forbids extraditing their own citizens, even for the most serious crimes. Claudia was then placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, but nothing came of it. Years went by, and it seemed justice for Carl's murder would never be realized. In Brazil, Claudia built a new life for herself. She got remarried and started her own accounting business. Meanwhile, Carl's loved ones suffered, knowing Claudia got away with cold-blooded murder. But they weren't about to give up so easily. They planned on doing whatever it took to bring her back to the US so she could face the consequences of her actions. Trumbull County prosecuting attorney Dennis Watkins spearheaded the effort to prevent Claudia from escaping justice. From the moment Carl was gunned down in his own home, Dennis launched a campaign to bring Claudia back for trial, flooding government agencies with letters and emails across 2 presidential administrations. Still, it seemed like nothing could be done. Brazil refused to extradite Claudia. In the face of mounting frustration, Carl's loved ones felt disheartened, as their struggle was an uphill battle leading nowhere. It appeared Claudia had indeed slipped through their fingers. And it might have stayed that way. But the cozy new life Claudia had built for herself in Brazil was about to be ripped away. You see, when Claudia got her U.S. citizenship back in 1999, she took an oath renouncing her Brazilian citizenship. That meant Brazilian law could no longer protect her. So when this new loophole was discovered, the Ministry of Justice in Brazil revoked Claudia's citizenship. For the next 3 years, Claudia fought to avoid being sent back to the U.S., going to the Supreme Court of Brazil. But she was fighting a losing battle. On January 17, 2018, nearly 11 years of evading justice, Claudia was officially extradited to the U.S. to face Carl's loved ones and the consequences of her actions, making her the first person in Brazilian history to be extradited. Walking into the interrogation room, Claudia no longer resembled the woman she once was. It appeared life on the run had taken a toll on her. In fact, she barely looked like the same person. From her initial interrogation with police, Claudia appeared to be very cooperative, to the point she waived her right to speak to a lawyer. She was ready to tell the truth, at least her version of it, and she felt as though she had nothing to hide. Although she immediately confessed to killing her late husband, during her trial, she claimed her intention initially had been to kill herself, not Carl. After finding out she was pregnant yet again, for a third time, she devised a plan.
And on March 10th and 11th, you worked on building a suicide device.
Yes, it did.
And why do you think you needed to build the suicide device?
Because the recoil, you can control recoil. The gun can do things that you don't expect it to do. So I had to stabilize the gun to make sure that the gun was not going to shoot up or down or sideways. And I thought that if I built a wood block and had a seat and measured that wood block to have a hole in the middle of it, that I would stick a gun through it and just pull the trigger, there would be no recoil. The gun would not move.
Claudia's plan apparently came with two options.
So at this point in time, you had two plans. Plan A was that you were going to try and reconcile with Carl, let him know you were pregnant, and hopefully he would let you have the baby and you could continue your marriage, correct?
That was plan A.
And plan B was, if he rejected you like he did on the prior occasions, you were going to kill yourself with the device.
That was plan B.
When Carl came home on March 12th, Claudia confronted him with the pregnancy test. According to Claudia, this is what happened next.
And it was that point that you showed him the pregnancy test.
I did.
Now, earlier you said your plan was to let the pregnancy kind of get along to the point where he couldn't say no?
You're right. I was not planning on telling him that I was pregnant that day. It was my emotions that got the best of me, and I showed him the pregnancy test, even though it was not my plan to show him the pregnancy test.
And how did he respond to the pregnancy test?
He said that he didn't care that I was pregnant. That was some subject he didn't want to talk about.
As Claudia expected, Carl didn't want to hear about another pregnancy, and an argument ensued.
He said, we discussed that, and I don't want you to have a baby. I'm not going to have a baby. He gave me a bunch of reasons why I couldn't have a baby, and I asked him a bunch of times, why? And he always had one excuse worse than the other. And I gave him an option. I go back to New York and by myself. And then he said, sooner or later, you're gonna ask me for money. Then I kept asking him why. And then he said, I'm gonna adopt. my grandchild, Eva, my daughter. She's 18, she's pregnant. She's 8 months pregnant. And I'm gonna adopt her son so she can go to school. So in my head, everything. So I'm gonna have to kill my child so Eva can have a baby, and you can raise your own grandson, and I cannot have my baby.
During the argument, Claudia claimed Carl hit her and then went to take a shower.
I left the room.
Did he lock the door?
He locked the door from inside, yes.
And after you left the room, what did you do?
Took forever. I was anxious, so I was walking all over the house, up and down. And since I thought about sleeping pills, I had no more sleeping pills in the house because I had taken them all. So I found a bottle of moonshine in our kitchen, something that we bought when we went to Brazil on our trip. That day, I opened it and I started drinking. And I'm not used to alcohol. And I started drinking that trying to calm myself down.
And as you started drinking, what did you start thinking about?
I started thinking, this is not gonna work. I'm gonna really have to kill myself. And I was really imagining me dying. And I was thinking of other ways of convincing him to let me have the baby. So my mind was racing in both directions. In the direction of killing myself, imagining the whole thing, and in the direction of what else can I say to this man to make him change his mind.
Claudia decided to stand outside the primary bedroom door and put the gun to her own head once he opened the door.
I wanted him to realize that I'm really desperate. I wanted him to take me seriously when I put that gun to my head. I didn't really think at that moment I was going to pull that trigger. I want his attention.
When he saw Claudia standing there holding a gun to her own head, she claimed he didn't have much of a reaction.
He just stared at me for a while. 5-10 seconds. He didn't do a thing. He kept staring at me, kept staring at him, and I was crying. I was crying, and he didn't have any emotions to his face. Nothing. I couldn't read him. No emotion. All of a sudden, he grabbed me. He grabbed my wrist and my throat, and he grabbed me, and he just grabbed me. And then when he was done grabbing me, he just pushed me. He pushed me and I fell back and I hit that wall, the door frame in that area. I hit my back and my head and I just stayed there.
After Claudia claims Carl pushed her, she demanded they continue with the pregnancy conversation. But she said Carl refused.
I was talking and so I said maybe 3 or 4 sentences and he just kept shaking his head like, no, I don't want to talk anymore. And then he said that was a good idea. Why didn't I wait for him to leave the house and then go to the basement and shoot myself in the basement so I wouldn't get blood in his paintings.
Claudia then stated that it was that comment that sent her into a rage.
Well, I thought to myself, well, that's it. There's no more talking. I'm going to kill myself. But you know what? If I'm going to die, he's going to get his wish. The child's going to die. The 3 of us are going to die here right now. So I just started going down the steps. I just got up real fast and positioned myself behind him and I shot the first time and he died instantly. And he just fell. His body just fell like this. And his body just went boom. It just, in my head, he was on the 3rd step going down. It was in the middle, maybe 4th, 5th, but he was in the middle of the stairs. And since he did make that sound, like, if you were paying, since he didn't make that sound, it didn't move anymore. I know he died from the first shot.
Although Claudia says here at trial that she thought Carl had died after the first shot, she said she followed after him and shot him a few more times. She then claimed she turned the gun on herself, but the gun was out of ammunition. Next, Claudia called her dad in Brazil and explained she killed Carl, and then said goodbye before she intended to reload the gun to shoot herself. But apparently, Claudia's father managed to talk her out of it and to flee to Brazil.
He started directing me. He said, go to the bank. Do you have money? He asked me, do you have money? I said, yeah, I have a little bit of money in the bank. He said, go to the bank, get your passport, get whatever money you can get, and drive to the airport, and you're going to get it on a plane, and you're going to come to Brazil, you're going to come home. And I thought, my life is over. But my father was directing me, and my father was not the type that would ever direct me or tell me what to do. I felt like that little girl that day is taken care of.
Claudia didn't have the courage to kill herself. She said, although she just wanted to call the police and turn herself in, she decided to instead follow her father's instructions. Just before leaving her marital home, Claudia said she covered Carl's body with a comforter because she was worried someone looking through the window might see his body before she had a chance to flee the country. Not packing a single item of clothing or belongings, Claudia just made one stop on the way to the airport to retrieve her passport from her safety deposit box, as well as her school records and other important documents. Then she took out $3,000 from her checking account, purposely leaving $300 behind to avoid arousing suspicion. On her way to the Pittsburgh airport, Claudia called Southwest Airlines, identified herself as Carl's wife, and scored a free plane ticket to New York. From New York, she paid for her flight to Brazil entirely in cash. When Claudia landed in Rio, she reunited with her father.
I just met with my father at the airport area. We cried together. I told him everything, and I said, Dad, you know what I'm gonna do next, right? I came here to hug you, to give you a kiss. You know, I have to do this. I didn't say the word suicide, but he knew what I meant. I gotta do this. I gotta finish what I started. I gotta do this. He knew. He didn't know that I was gonna had ideas of jumping from the 19th floor of a hotel room in Copacabana. But he knew that I was gonna kill myself. So he tried to talk me out of it. He said, there's no talking me out of it. There's no talking me out of it. Don't try. So after I spent a couple of hours with my father, I said, you have to go because I'm not going to involve you with this. The police is going to go be after me. And if they catch me in your house, they are going to arrest you.
Claudia was paranoid her father would get into trouble for hiding a fugitive. Almost 2 days later, she booked a room at a hotel with plans to jump off the building. She called her father to say goodbye and then went to sleep. But after only 40 minutes, the phone started ringing. It was her father.
And he said, I spoke to a lawyer and I found out that, yes, you can be in my house and I'm not going to get arrested. You can stay in my house. I'm going to take you with me. You're my daughter and I love you. When my father said those words to me, that's what I had waited for 42 hours, 3 years.
Claudia had never heard such loving words coming from her father before. He arrived at the hotel in a cab to pick her up like a prince rescuing a princess. She spent the next few days at her father's home, deeply depressed. Despite her father's best efforts to cheer her up, nothing worked. Claudia wasn't sleeping or eating. Eventually, he called her siblings in Brasilia, Brazil's capital, and asked if they could take care of her. So her siblings purchased a plane ticket for her, and she flew out to Brasilia, where she stayed with her sister at her apartment. Deeply concerned about Claudia's mental state, her family discussed committing her to a mental health facility. Not wanting to be hospitalized again, Claudia ran away to a small piece of land she'd bought many years ago. There, using the $9,000 she'd wired to her father, Claudia built a shack to live in, and for nearly a decade after, Claudia slowly rebuilt a new life for herself. Over the years, she remarried, started her own accounting business, and lived in a middle-class area. Claudia's testimony came under fire during her cross-examination.
Carl's walking away from you. He's done talking.
He's done talking.
All right. And you shot Carl Hoerig a few days after you transferred $9,900 to Brazil, correct?
Yes.
You shot Carl Hoerig with the same gun that you bought 2 days earlier at Slugmasters, correct?
Yes.
You shot Carl Hoerig with the same gun that you paid $227.52 for a laser sight 2 days before, correct?
Yes.
You shot Carl Hoerig with the same gun that you had Brian Martin put that laser sight on when you bought it, correct?
Yes.
You shot Carl Hoerig with the same gun that you practiced with for about an hour 2 days earlier, correct?
Yes.
You shot Carl Hoerig 2 days after now what we hear is the first time just a salesman trying to get you to buy a bigger gun. You had no intent of buying that one, though, right?
No.
Okay. You shot and killed Carl Hoerig by putting not one, not two, but 3 shots into his body, correct?
Yes.
The prosecution accused Claudia of premeditating the murder and pointed out that if someone wanted to kill themselves, they wouldn't need a laser sight installed on the gun to accomplish that goal. Ultimately, Claudia was convicted of aggravated murder. Just before sentencing, Carl's brother, Paul Hoerig, spoke of the heartache he and his family have experienced for over a decade.
The fact Claudia so arrogantly fled to a foreign country after killing my brother has been both heartbreaking and frustrating. Knowing Claudia selfishly went on with a normal life, starting a business, and getting remarried as if nothing had happened is difficult for me to comprehend. She lived free and in the open for over 9 years while my family and I struggled to have her detained. This nightmare was followed by almost 2 years of her filing numerous appeals to stay in Brazil. Her selfish and deceptive actions of playing games with her U.S. citizenship to maintain her freedom in Brazil reveals her true character. It has been exceptionally brutal and emotionally draining for my family to have spent 10 years and 10 months fighting to have her extradited from Brazil. There have been countless days writing, calling, emailing to gain support, missing work, attending meetings, just to bring her back to the United States. It literally took the efforts of a team, family, friends, the prosecutor, law enforcement, politicians, the state and justice departments, who have spent countless time and effort over 10 years and 10 months to finally have her extradited back to the Trumbull County.
Claudia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after 28 years. As the courtroom fell silent, the weight of the verdict hung heavy in the air. After listening to Claudia's testimony, it must have been hard for the jury to make heads or tails of Carl and Claudia's relationship. But the truth is, no one will ever truly know what happened behind closed doors. What is for certain is that Claudia had no right to end Carl's life, to take a father away from his children, his family and loved ones. At the moment of Claudia's sentencing, the truth of her actions and the gravity of her choices had finally caught up with her. As she was led away to face her time in prison, The courtroom echoed a somber realization. Justice, though delayed, had prevailed. For Carl's loved ones, it was a bittersweet victory. A reminder that, even in the face of unimaginable loss, the pursuit of truth endures.